The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise has thrived for 40 years, and despite its ups and downs, it shows no signs of fading away anytime soon. Most fans credit the summer of Turtle Mania in 1990 for the franchise's longevity, but it would be a disservice to forget that the Turtles sparked not just one, but at least two significant cultural phenomena, and the very first one was caused by their debut issue in 1984. So join me today as we explore the origin of the Turtles, both within the story and behind the scenes. The Turtles' origin is told as the title for which the Turtles' first adventure is known. The issue came out in May 1984 and was the product of the artistic efforts of Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. How the issue came to exist is a topic I'll cover later in this video. Let's dive into the story first. After 13 years of training, our protagonists were caught against a wall in a back alley by 15 members of the Purple Dragons gang. The thugs thought they were facing guys in turtle costumes, but they were wrong. They were facing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The Purple Dragons were young and experienced, but even with their knives and firearms, they were no match for the Turtles, who were in their very first real fight. The battle was over by the time the police arrived at the scene. Knowing the police wouldn't understand them, the Turtles retreated into a storm drain, fading into the night. Thanks to being raised in the sewers, storm drains across the city were the perfect ninja hiding places for the mutants, as they were highly familiar with every inch of the subterranean passages. Even their turtle lair was concealed behind a hidden sliding brick door. After learning of the Turtles' success against the Purple Dragons, Splinter realized it was finally time to tell them about the mission he'd trained them for over the past 13 years. He sat them down and explained how this story started 20 years ago, when he was the pet rat of the greatest shadow warrior of the Foot Clan, Hamato Yoshi. His cage was kept in a dojo where he watched his master's daily practice. He started mimicking his movements and eventually learned the art of ninjutsu. The Foot Clan was a much feared organization in Japan. Another member of the clan was Oroku Nagi, who had a rivalry with Yoshi that extended to their love for a young woman named Tang Shen. However, the competition for Shen was pointless, as she only wanted Yoshi. Filled with jealousy, Nagi went to Shen's house one night and demanded her love. After her rejection, he got violent. If he couldn't have her, no one would. That was when Yoshi arrived, and at the sight of his loved one being beaten to death, he was filled with a rage that clouded his senses, and by the time his mind cleared up, he had already killed Nagi. Unfortunately, killing a fellow clan member was a dishonor. Yoshi was given two choices: to take his own life and hope for honor in the next life, or flee the country and try to start a new life. He chose the latter, and moved to New York with Shen and Splinter, where he established a small martial arts school. That should have been the end of it, but Nagi's younger brother, Orokusaki, who was only 7 then, vowed vengeance on Yoshi. The Foot Clan took advantage of his passion and trained him for their own purposes. Fueled by his anger, he soon surpassed his teachers, and by the time he reached adulthood, he was the most cunning assassin in the clan, and an able leader. Because of that, the clan sent him to the US to head the New York branch of the Foot. Within the first year in New York, the clan became a force to be reckoned with, engaging in drugs, arms, and assassinations. It was then that Saki assumed the Shredder identity. One night 15 years ago, he tracked down Yoshi, and after killing Shen, he waited for Yoshi's return. By the time Yoshi realized who the Shredder was, the fight was over. As a result of the battle, Splinter's cage was smashed open and the rat was freed. Now masterless, he escaped to the streets, where he started living off of garbage scraps. One day, he witnessed a bizarre accident. He saw an old blind man crossing the street about to be run over by a large truck. At that moment, a young man leaped to save him, and because of the sudden braking movement, a canister bounced out of the truck and hit the young man near his eyes. But let's not focus so much on the young hero. Instead, let's focus on that canister, which started bouncing around, hitting and smashing a glass jar that contained 4 small turtles. The reptiles fell into the sewers, followed by the canister, which was smashed after hitting the floor. Splinter went down to check on the turtles and found them bathed in a glowing ooze. After putting them into a coffee can, he took them to his burrow and washed off as much of the ooze as possible. The following day, the turtles had doubled in size, and Splinter had become larger and more intelligent. Within the year, the turtles continued growing and started speaking. After seeing them imitate his movements, just as he used to do when he practiced with his master, Splinter decided to train them as true ninjas. Using a battered copy of a book on Renaissance art he fished out of a storm drain, he chose names for them: Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. Catching up to the present, Splinter was now old and presumably at the end of his life, and he wanted the turtles to perform one mission before his death: to avenge his master Yoshi and his wife by challenging and killing Oroku Saki. Of all the turtles, Splinter chose Raphael to deliver the message to Shredder. Perhaps reflecting his need for emancipation, Raphael felt free while exploring the larger world, unlike his brothers who preferred to live underground. He infiltrated the Foot headquarters, and after taking down a few of the Shredder's men, he threw a sigh with a message at Saki. Shredder, who was offering protection to some clients, sensed the incoming sigh and deflected it. After losing his clients, Shredder promised death to his mysterious challenger, no matter who he was. As promised, the turtles waited for the Shredder at the designated place, but Saki wasn't alone. He showed up with a small army of Foot Ninja. While the turtles managed to take care of them, it came at a price. Shredder noticed they ended up scarred and bleeding from the battle. Now understanding their fighting style, he challenged them to fight him one by one or all together as they saw fit. Raph, Donnie, Mikey, and Leo took turns fighting him, but the Shredder was simply too skilled for them. That's when Leo wised up and changed tactics, ordering his brothers to fight from a distance using shurikens, sais, and small blades. With all these distractions, the turtles were able to get closer and strike him until Leo impaled him with his katana. With the Shredder defeated, Leo offered him a chance to go out with honor by committing seppuku. But Saki decided to take them with him instead, as he had one final resource: a thermite grenade. Just before the explosion, Donnie threw his bow at Shredder's face, causing him to fall backward with the grenade, getting shredded by the explosion midair. After seeing the last remains of the Shredder, the turtles faded away once more into the night. And that was the first issue of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. However, to understand its cultural significance, we should first explore how this issue and the Turtles came to be. If there's one point in history we should focus on first, it would be 1981. Kevin Eastman, who was 19 then, was working in Amherst, Massachusetts. One day on the bus on his way home from work, he found a discarded copy of a free cartoon magazine called SCAT, the Valley Comics Gazette. This publication featured illustrations by local cartoonists, and the cover in particular was done by Peter Laird. Kevin, a huge fan of underground comics, felt this was the right style for him, so he assembled a portfolio and took a bus to their offices in the hopes of landing a job. Unfortunately, the magazine was on its way out. Still, after looking at his portfolio, they noted uncanny similarities between his and Peter Laird's styles, so they offered to introduce them. The two exchanged contact information, and Peter, who was around 27 then, invited Kevin to his home in Northampton, Massachusetts. There, Kevin saw a Jack Kirby original for the first time, and the two bonded over their shared love for comics. They quickly became friends. Recognizing their compatible styles, they developed a collaborative method of working. They would loosely sketch alternating pages of a story, refining details and splitting the inking duties, creating a truly joint effort. Eventually, Kevin returned to Maine to cook lobsters for a living, while Peter remained an illustrator and cartoonist. In 1982, Peter met his wife Janine, and they moved to Dover, New Hampshire, where she was working on her master's degree. There, they lived with two housemates. Since Kevin wasn't living far away in the summer of 1983, the couple invited him to rent one of their spare rooms. This was their big effort to become full-time artists, and that's when they founded Mirage Studios. Named so because the studio was just a living room in Peter's house. The two created a new character, the Fugitoid, and planned to release his stories in a poster comic format. Unfortunately, no publisher wanted to take on the project, so they self-published an anthology named Gobbledygook, which included 2 chapters of the Fugitoid saga. The first issue was photocopied at a local copy shop and then collated and hand-stapled by them. Therefore, it's not considered a comic book. Only 150 copies were made. The second issue included 2 more chapters plus other stories. One night in November 1983, while still working on the last chapter of The Fugitoid, Kevin Eastman felt inspired to make an artistic joke for Peter Laird. While Peter watched TV, Kevin sketched a masked, nunchuck-wielding Ninja Turtle, probably based on a recurring joke they had about turtles kicking buses. He showed it to Peter, who laughed and then drew a different version of it. To top it off, Kevin penciled 4 turtles in dramatic poses. Peter took the drawing, inked it, and added Teenage Mutant to Ninja Turtles. That could have been the end of it, but the following day they realized they had something special. They decided to turn this joke into their next comic book project, drawing inspiration from Frank Miller's Ronin and Daredevil, and their mutual admiration for Jack Kirby's art. Their main goal was to have fun and create something for their portfolio. They never suspected they had a multi-million-dollar franchise on their hands. The first issue of TMNT paid homage to Daredevil's origin from 1963, serving as a flip side to it. While Daredevil's story follows Matt Murdock, who becomes blind after coming into contact with a radioactive substance while saving an old blind man, the Turtle story follows the canister of ooze. The parallels didn't stop there. Splinter was a nod to Matt Sensei, Stick, and they chose a rat because the story took place in storm drains, sewers, and alleys where rats are often found. Another parallel was the Foot Clan, which was basically the Hand. Shredder, however, was inspired by a metal cheese grater in Peter's kitchen. The character was almost named Great Man due to this inspiration. Using Peter's copy of Jansen's History of Art for inspiration, the duo chose the names of the turtles from 4 of their favorite Renaissance artists. But there are 2 footnotes here to discuss. Donatello was almost named Bernini, but Peter insisted on Donatello instead. Unfortunately, when lettering the first issue, Kevin mistakenly spelled Michelangelo as Michael Angelo, and the character kept this typo for 17 years. It's unclear why they decided to go for Italian names, as the creators have conflicting versions about it. One possibility is that they didn't feel confident in picking cool Japanese names for them. Perhaps a wise decision considering Saki is a girl's name. The characters weren't too defined at this point, but Raphael was loosely based on Kevin and Donatello was loosely based on Peter. Kevin created thumbnail drawings, wrote the story, and choreographed the action to fill a 40-page comic book. Peter refined the script and dialogue, and they collaboratively created the art, passing pages back and forth to achieve a true hybrid of their styles. They also used duo-shade artboards, a specially treated paper that reacted to the application of certain chemicals to produce the desired shading effects. Due to the high cost of these sheets, they used them wisely, often fitting 3 pages per sheet, which is why the margins were so narrow in that first issue. Ultimately, finishing the first issue took them 2.5 months. They approached a local printer in Dover to get a quote for 3,000 copies in black and white, with 1 additional color for the cover. The total was $2,050. Sadly, with their joint efforts, they were $1,300 shy of that amount. They approached Kevin's uncle Quentin, an art supply seller, who offered them a check for $1,074, an interest-free loan that allowed Mirage Studios to print their first official comic book. It also left them with enough cash to place advertisements in the Comics Buyer's Guide. This is where the genius side of their invention paid off. Because the book had such an odd, attention-grabbing name, it started gaining some media coverage. After selling about 150 copies at conventions, they decided to sell the rest to distributors, who would then sell them to comic shops. With positive word of mouth, the book started selling like crazy. Not long after, the initial 3,000 copies sold out. The book went into a second print of 6,000 copies, which sold out immediately. A few months later, a third printing of 35,000 copies sold out in days. By then, copies of the first edition were being sold for $25. a surprising increase from the original $1.50 in less than a year. By 1985, the fourth printing was probably around 60,000 copies. The book went back for a fifth printing in 1988 and a final sixth print in 1992. Peter Laird published a retoned and relettered reprint of 3,000 copies in 2005 with minor dialogue tweaks. In any case, the creators realized there was enough interest in the Turtles to do more issues. While they were collating the orders for issue 2, they found out they would net $2,000 each, which at the time was a third of what they would make in an entire year as illustrators. They then realized they could release 6 of these comics a year and make a living doing comic books. The duo then moved back to Northampton, Massachusetts, where they had met in 1981. But I started this video talking about a cultural phenomenon caused by the first issue of TMNT. I was referring to the black and white comic book boom of the mid-1980s. This period was marked by a surge in the publication and popularity of black and white comic books. The successful release of TMNT #1 is considered the catalyst for this phenomenon. The book's unexpected success inspired many independent creators to publish their own comics, hoping to replicate TMNT's popularity and profitability. Being indie publishers came with its pros and cons. Unlike the big two publishers, Marvel and DC, these comics had more creative freedom to explore diverse genres and styles. Unfortunately, just because TMNT was successful didn't mean everyone who followed the same steps would succeed. The rapid influx of new titles led to market saturation, resulting in financial losses for publishers and retailers. Furthermore, the speculative nature of the market also contributed to its volatility. Many of these books were cheaply made and of very low quality, which ended up driving readers away. As a result of this boom, there was a crash that put many comic shops out of business. But simultaneously, the comic book boom demonstrated that indie publishers could produce fresh and innovative stories. This led to the creation of new independent publishers like Dark Horse, Image, Eclipse, and more, which allowed comic books to explore more alternative ideas. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 is an interesting read. Even from today's perspective, after all these years of independent books, there's something captivating about it. It looks like other things, yet like nothing else at the same time. It has the appearance of a mainstream comic book, but the love for underground comics that inspired its creators. Plus, the duo shades gave the book a gritty and realistic look that wasn't common at the time. It's like Miller meets Kirby meets Crumb, or something like that. In fact, the inspirations from Miller and Kirby are notable, especially when compared to Frank Miller's Ronin. Miller's influences can also be felt in captions, dialogues, and jagged panel borders. Kirby's influences can be found in double splash pages, action layouts, and dynamic poses. As mentioned before, the book was intended to be a one-shot, so the creators never thought about the consequences of the first story. They didn't consider keeping the main villain alive, or that Splinter wouldn't die for a long time. In fact, Splinter's relationship with the Turtles in this issue felt more like a master than a father. He and Saki are basically two sides of the same coin, with both trying to exact revenge for the death of a loved one. Of course, Saki was an actual criminal mastermind, but you get what I mean. Over time, Shredder's death began a saga of never-ending vengeance, which wouldn't stop until the end of Volume 1 during the City at War saga. It's also worth mentioning that for Kevin Eastman, it was the first time plotting a story longer than 10 pages. The results are quite impressive, because it took place in a city he'd never been to and featured martial arts he wasn't familiar with. Of course, there are some peculiarities with the story. For example, the third act takes up almost half the comic. The book is a true collaboration between the two artists, but there's one page in particular that was probably penciled and inked by Kevin. Page 9, the one with the empty streets, was almost not included. Peter didn't want to do it, as nothing was happening there and it would have been a waste of that pricey duo shade. However, Kevin stood by his artistic decision, and Peter agreed to keep it. Over time, Peter changed his mind about it. The page ended up introducing a calm break after the action, a separation between the acts, and it also demonstrated the ability of the Turtles to disappear into the darkness. In 1986, the story was colored by Ken Fedunowicz, and Janice Cohen for the earliest collected edition by First Comics. By then, the Turtles had already been established as all having red bandanas, but there were notable differences from the original. The colorization process was done over copies of the original before the duo shading process, so the tones are absent. There are also some slight differences in graffiti and other details. Overall, the color palette of the book is not great, but it's an excellent opportunity to see how Kevin envisioned this world with colors. This version was also re-lettered by Steve Levine, who would later re-letter the issue for future reprints. These days, all collected editions have the original lettering. The events in this first issue were, of course, adapted with varying degrees of faithfulness into many adaptations of the franchise. Feel free to name them in the comments. In any case, after the Turtles survived the black and white comic boom, they would survive a second cultural storm named Turtle Mania, which is a story for another day. Suffice it to say that throughout all those years, the Turtles creators kept creative control over the characters and helped other creators do the same, thanks to initiatives like Tundra Publishing and the Zarek Foundation. And here we are, 40 years later, still talking about the first appearance of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a creation that took the world and its creators by surprise. Have you read the first issue of TMNT? What's your take on it? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, see you in the sewers.